Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today, really deep, into something that's got everyone talking. Donald Trump's 2024 campaign, and honestly, some of the stuff he's been saying is raising some eyebrows, to say the least.
Yeah, we've got this recent news article that we're dissecting, and let me tell you, the closer we get to election day, the bolder, I'd even say more alarming his statements get.
Right. And it's like, unlike anything we've seen from a presidential candidate, at least in recent history.
Absolutely, yeah.
The article talks about this moment at a rally in Pennsylvania where Trump, he basically expresses regret for leaving the White House, and then he kind of doubles down on his claims that the 2020 election was rigged.
It's like, pouring fuel on a fire that's already burning out of control, right? The
Yeah.
whole idea of a peaceful transfer of power, like the bedrock of our democracy, it gets really shaky when a former president, let alone one running again, keeps undermining it like that.
And it's not just talk, right? The article reminds us that he's actually facing federal charges because of his attempts to overturn the election results.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking serious charges here. Conspiracy to defraud the U.S., obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy against voting rights. Like, this is the real deal. Potentially huge prison sentences.
Wow. Okay, so that's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it casts a big shadow on everything, on his campaign, on whether he even respects the rule of law at all.
Right, right. And the article goes on, it talks about some comments, and I mean, these are really disturbing. Like the one where he implies that a gunman would have to shoot through the fake news to get to him.
It's chilling. And what's even more chilling is that it's not just some random off the cuff remark, this kind of inflammatory rhetoric. It's like a pattern with him.
So you're saying it's not just that he says shocking things, it's that his words, they could actually lead to violence.
Exactly. The article brings up another example, the one about guns being trained on Liz Cheney's face,
Hmm.
another critic of his. So there's this pattern using violent language, violent imagery, and it's deeply concerning.
Because words have power, especially coming from someone like him with such a huge platform.
Absolutely. It's like he's normalizing this idea that violence is an okay response to criticism. And in a democracy, that's terrifying.
Right. It's like chipping away at the foundation, like those unwritten
Yeah.
rules of how we're supposed to behave, those democratic norms.
Exactly. Like the idea that we can disagree, we can debate, but peacefully. And when a leader starts messing with that, well, it creates this climate of fear and intimidation, and it makes it really hard to have any kind of real conversation about the issues that matter.
So what's that like for everyday Americans? I mean, how are people supposed to talk about politics when there's this backdrop of potential violence?
Yeah, it's like trying to have a picnic in the middle of a hurricane, right? It just stifles everything, open dialogue, finding common ground. It all becomes almost impossible.
Okay, so we've got this trend, election denial, violent rhetoric, attacking those democratic norms. But the article doesn't stop there. It also talks about how Trump treats Kamala Harris, and I mean, it's just dripping with disrespect.
Right. Mispronouncing her name, the offensive language, even laughing at that supporter who made that crude suggestion about her past, it's appalling.
Yeah, and it's not like this is just about Harris, is it?
Yeah.
The article makes it clear that Trump has a history of disrespecting women, especially his political opponents.
It's a pattern, yeah. And it's not just about being polite, it's about creating a climate where women might feel intimidated, discouraged from even participating in politics.
It's heartbreaking, right? To think that young women might see this and decide, nope, not for me, not worth it.
Absolutely. And, the article contrasts this with Harris's campaign, which focuses on unity, on policy issues like abortion rights. It's a completely different approach.
It's like they're playing different games entirely. Trump's all about fueling that anger and division, while Harris is trying to appeal to hope and shared purpose. It's fascinating to see these strategies side by side.
And it raises this big question, what kind of leadership do we want, right?
Hmm.
Do we reward the aggression, the negativity, or do we choose something else, something more respectful, more focused on finding solutions?
That's a big question, and the article really drives home the point that this election isn't just about policy, it's about who we are as a country. It's like we're at this fork in the road, and the path we choose now, well, it's going to determine where we end up for years to come.
Yeah, it's a powerful way to think about the stakes. Are we a nation defined by division and distrust, or are we something else, something better? This election is going to tell us a lot about that.
And it makes you wonder, like, what happens if this aggressive approach, this breaking all the rules, what if it becomes the new normal? Is this just Trump, or are we seeing something bigger, a permanent shift in how we do politics?
It's a scary thought, you know? The article reminds us that there used to be lines you didn't cross, things politicians just didn't do, but those lines are getting blurrier every day. And Trump, well, he's often the one leading the charge.
And you can't ignore the role of the social media in all of this. It's like it's created these echo chambers where extreme views thrive.
Yeah.
And misinformation, it spreads like wildfire.
Social media has changed everything. It's made it so much harder to have those nuanced conversations, to find common ground, to even agree on what's true. It's like trying to build a house on quicksand.
So what can we do? I mean, as citizens, how do we break out of this cycle of outrage and division? It's easy to feel overwhelmed, like there's nothing we could do.
It's tough, no doubt, but I think it starts with each of us, making that conscious effort to have respectful conversations, to really think critically about the information we're getting, and to hold our leaders accountable. We can't just sit back and be outraged. We have to be active, engaged citizens working towards something better.
Right. It's about remembering that despite all our differences, we're all Americans, we have a shared future, and we might disagree on policy, but we should be able to agree that civility, respect, those things matter, especially in our political discourse.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, our democracy depends on our ability to debate, to find common ground, even when it's hard.
This deep dive, it's been a real eye-opener, honestly, kind of unsettling, but it's forced us to take a hard look at where we are, what's happening in American politics right now.
It's important to step back, to think about these trends, and to ask ourselves, what do they mean for the future? Because we can't just accept this erosion of norms, this divisive rhetoric as the new normal. We just can't.
The article does a great job of presenting all sides, right? It shows us what's concerning about Trump's rhetoric, but it also acknowledges that the whole political landscape is complicated, there aren't any easy answers, but it definitely makes us ask the right questions.
For sure, these are complex issues. They require thought. They require us to be willing to have those tough conversations, even when they make us uncomfortable.
You said earlier that this election, it's a referendum on our values. What do you think are the core values at stake here?
Well, when you think about a functioning democracy, you need a few things, right? Respect for the truth, respect for the rule of law, respect for each other, even when we disagree, vehemently disagree. These are the things that make the whole system work. And when those things start to crumble, well, the whole system is in danger.
That's powerful. It's a reminder that the choices we make in this election, they have consequences, consequences that will last long after November.
Absolutely. This isn't just about who sits in the White House. It's about who we are as a nation, what we believe in.
This has been a thought-provoking conversation, to say the least, and we've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to explore.
Definitely.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to really ponder as we head into the final part?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. We can't be passive, not now, not at this moment. Our democracy needs us to be active, engaged citizens, to stand up for the values that make it work. And that means having those tough conversations, holding our leaders accountable, and demanding more from our political system, the future of our country. It really depends on it.
That's a powerful call to action, and I couldn't agree more. We'll be back in part 3 to explore how all of this rhetoric, how it might impact the election and the bigger political landscape. But until then, stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay hopeful, because the power to shape our future, it's in our hands. Okay, so picking up where we left off, with this news article about Trump's campaign, I mean, one thing that really jumps out is just how different his whole approach is compared to Kamala Harris. It's almost like you're talking to two completely separate Americas.
Yeah, and what's interesting is while Trump's laser focused on these grievances, on casting doubt on the whole election process, Harris, she's emphasizing unity. She's got this forward-looking agenda. It's almost a classic clash of styles, right? Trump's betting on outrage, Harris on optimism.
And the article even specifically calls out Harris's focus on actual policy issues. Things like restoring federal abortion rights after Roe v. Wade was overturned. It's such a contrast to Trump's, his focus on personal attacks and basically just trying to scare people.
It's like she's saying, let's fix things, and he's saying, let's be mad. And that really gets to the heart of this whole election. I think, are voters looking for someone to fight their enemies, or are they looking for someone to govern? Trump's strategy, as concerning as it is, it's worked for him before, right? He taps into this deep well of discontent, and he channels it towards his opponents.
So is that enough? I mean, is appealing to hope and unity enough to win these days? Can Harris actually connect with voters who are, they're tired of all the drama, but they're also really worried about where the country's headed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Will voters be drawn to that firebrand style, or will they go for something more, measured, more policy-focused? It's really a battle for the soul of the American electorate.
Yeah, and the article makes this point. This election isn't just about, like, policies. It's about what America is, who we are.
Right.
It's like we're at this crossroads, and the choice we make now is going to shape the country for years to come.
It's a powerful way to put it, right? Are we a nation defined by division and distrust, or can we be something else, something more? This selection, it's really a test of our values, of what we want to be.
And it makes you think, what happens to our political discourse? How we talk to each other about politics. What if this aggressive approach, this breaking all the rules, what if it becomes the standard? Is this a Trump thing, or is this a sign of something bigger? A permanent shift in how we do politics?
It's a scary thought, right? Because the article reminds us there used to be certain lines you just didn't cross, certain tactics that were off limits, but it seems like those lines are getting blurrier and blurrier, and Trump, well, he's often the one leading the charge.
And then you have social media, which has definitely played a role, right? It's like it's created these echo chambers where the most extreme views can flourish, and misinformation, it spreads like wildfire.
Social media has changed the game. There's no doubt about that. It's made it so much harder to have nuanced conversations, to find common ground, to even agree on the basic fact. It's like trying to build a bridge in the middle of an earthquake.
So what can we do? I mean, as citizens, how do we break free from this cycle of outrage and division? Because it's easy to feel overwhelmed, helpless, like nothing we do can make a difference.
It's a huge challenge, but I think it starts with us, each of us making that conscious effort to be respectful in our conversations, to really think critically about the information we're consuming, and to hold our leaders accountable for their words and their actions.
Mm.
We can't just sit back and be outraged. We have to be active. We have to be engaged. We have to work towards something better.
It's about remembering, right? Remembering that even with all our differences, we're all Americans. We share this country, this future. And even when we disagree on policy, we should be able to agree on basic civility, on respect, especially when it comes to politics.
Well said, because at the end of the day, our democracy, it relies on our ability to have those healthy debates, to find that common ground, even when it's hard.
This deep dive has been, well, it's been eye-opening, a little bit unsettling, but it's really forced us to look in the mirror to see what's happening in American politics right now.
And I think it's so important to take that step back, to think about these trends and to ask ourselves, what do they mean? Where are we headed? Because we can't just accept this, the erosion of democratic norms, the divisive rhetoric. We can't accept it as the new normal.
And the article does a good job, I think, of showing us all the sides, right? It highlights what's concerning about Trump's approach, but it also acknowledges that the whole political landscape is messy. There aren't easy answers. But it does make you think. It makes you ask the right questions.
Exactly. These are complex issues. They require careful thought. They require a willingness to have tough conversations, even when they make us uncomfortable.
You mentioned earlier that this election is a referendum on our values. What would you say are the most important values at stake here?
Well, I think for a democracy to work, you need a foundation. And that foundation is built on a few key things: respect for the truth, respect for the rule of law, respect for each other. Even when we disagree, and I mean really disagree, these are the principles that make the system function. And when they start to erode, the whole system is at risk.
That's a powerful statement. And it reminds us that this election, it's not just about who wins. It's about who we are, what we believe in, and the choices we make. They'll have consequences that go far beyond November.
Absolutely. This is about the future, not just our future, but the future of our country, of our democracy.
It's been an amazing conversation. We've covered so much ground, but there's still more to explore, right?
Definitely more to uncover.
So before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, what's one thing you want our listeners to really think about as we head into the final part?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that we can't afford to be passive. Not at this moment in our history. Our democracy needs us to be active, engaged citizens, to stand up for the values that make it work. And that means being willing to have those tough conversations, to hold our leaders accountable, and to demand better from our political system. Because the future, our future, it really depends on us taking action.
All right, so we're back for the final part of this deep dive into Trump's campaign rhetoric. And the article we've been talking about, well, it doesn't hold back when it comes to analyzing the potential fallout, like how all this might actually affect the election itself. And I got to say, some of the findings are pretty surprising.
Yeah, what really stands out is this idea that Trump's strategy could backfire, especially with women voters. It's almost like he's pushing too hard, going beyond what people are willing to accept.
The article even mentions that some of his own advisors are like, hey, maybe tone it down a bit,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to that whole protector of women thing he keeps repeating.
Mhm.
Apparently, it's not exactly coming across as reassuring, more like, well, kind of creepy.
It's interesting, right? Like his team can see the potential damage, but he seems to be doubling down anyway, which makes you think maybe he's more worried about energizing his base than actually trying to win over, a broader range of voters. It's a risky move, for sure. High risk, high reward. We'll have to see if it pays off.
And the polls seem to be reflecting that, right? Like the article points out that Trump is trailing Harris by a lot among women voters and I mean across the board, different ages, different backgrounds. It's a pretty clear sign that when you alienate a huge chunk of the electorate, well, there can be consequences.
It raises this big question, can Trump even win without the support of women? Given the current political climate, how important the female vote is these days, it seems like a pretty tough road ahead for him.
And, even if he does pull off a victory, I mean, think about the bigger picture. What does it say about our democracy if this is how you win? If this kind of, I don't know, this disregard for the rules, this aggressive approach, if that's what gets rewarded, where does that leave us?
That's the key takeaway here, right? This isn't just about politics, about who wins or loses. This is about us, about what we believe in. Are we okay with a system where it's all about winning no matter the cost? Are we okay with aggression, division, all this disregard for democratic norms? I mean, is that who we are?
The article really frames this election as a choice between two visions, right? Two very different visions of America. On one side, you have Trump's campaign, which is built on fear, on resentment, this constant sense of grievance. And on the other side, you have Harris, her message of hope, of unity, this focus on actually solving problems. It's a pretty stark contrast, and it's up to us, each of us, to decide what kind of future we want.
It's a choice, yeah. And not just for us, but for the generations that come after us. What are we teaching our kids about how to participate in politics?
Do we want them to inherit a system where winning is everything, or do we want something different, something better?
This deep dive, it's been fascinating, a little unsettling, but honestly, it's been really important. It's forced us to confront some tough truths about American politics, about what's happening right now, and what it means for our future.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I think the most important thing to remember is this. We can't just sit back and watch not now. We have to be active, engaged citizens. We have to stand up for the values that make our democracy work. And that means being willing to have those tough conversations, holding our leaders accountable, demanding more from our system, because the future, it really is in our hands.
Powerful word and a perfect way to end this deep dive. As we head into this election, remember to stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful.